Quote Checker is a website I built. It's a tool for students, academics, writers, journalists, whatever, anyone who writes and wants to improve their writing. Specifically, Quote Checker helps you quote accurately. If you're quoting from a book, say, and you want to make changes to that quote, there are certain rules that dictate how to make those changes properly, how to indicate those changes properly. For example, if you want to quote from this book right here, The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch, there's this really nice passage that I've highlighted here. Let's say I want to quote from this. Let's say I'm writing an article and I want to incorporate this quote into my article. What I can do is I can paste the quote into Quote Checker, and I've already prepared the source information here. Note that the end of the quote is italicized, and we can indicate that here using asterisks. This is something called Markdown syntax, in case you're familiar with it. It's just a way to teach it or tell it to emphasize this text. Now let's say I want to quote from it. And let's say I want to shorten this a little bit. I want to make this a little more succinct. So let's copy this over here. And what I want to do is I want to get rid of this conversely because we're taking it out of context, so it's not going to be clear what this word conversely refers to. And let's say I also want to get rid of these parentheses. And this is pretty good so far, I think. Now, there would be a bunch of issues with this. So what Quote Checker does, if you scroll down, is it shows you what's called a diff. This right here is called a diff. It means it determines the differences between the original, as I pasted it up here, and the quote, as I provided it. As you can see, it highlights two issues, and it gives you two different views. One is the sort of text view, and the other is a table. You can use both together. Red means that something was deleted from the original. And if it's underlined, if it has the squiggly red underline, it means that it was deleted improperly. And the table shows you what the problem is. So it says, I deleted the word conversely, and it says this is not a valid deletion. Why not? Because deletions must be indicated. For example, either I could use this ellipsis, or I could add a replacement. And the same is true of this removal of this parenthetical. So what we need to do to fix this quote is add the ellipsis at the beginning here. And now it should already show us that this deletion is now valid because it is followed by an ellipsis, and this ellipsis is itself valid. Now we need to make the same fix for the removal of the parenthetical. So ellipses are how we indicate that we removed something compared to the original text. This alerts the reader that the quote is not quite verbatim, and it shows the reader what we changed. So now all of our changes are legitimate. All of our changes are appropriate. You can see gray means that we added something. Some texts use a different kind of ellipsis. I like using the bracketed ellipsis because originals rarely would contain brackets, period, let alone bracketed, 3 consecutive dots. And so this is a pretty unambiguous indication that this is an ellipsis, I think. It's an unambiguous ellipsis. Sometimes texts use different kinds of ellipses. For example, sometimes texts use 3 dots with a space in between. You can do that too. And as long as you indicate that that's the kind of ellipsis you're using. By default, it'll use the bracketed ellipsis, but you can use whatever ellipsis you want. It's really up to you. Different style guides dictate a different use or dictate different ellipses. Now this tool is smart. It goes beyond this. You could also say we want to, let's say we want to, instead of speaking of plural claims, we wanted to speak of just one claim. So we want to say, I've settled on a simple test for judging a claim. Then you can use empty brackets here at the end to indicate that you removed the S, and we should surround the insertion by brackets to indicate that we have added this word a. Now you can see that it recognizes these changes and that they're all valid. If I hadn't put the brackets around the word a, or if I hadn't put these empty brackets behind claim, these would both be marked invalid right here, because this a is not indicated with brackets and this s is not, this deletion is not indicated. Sometimes, let me change this back to the original, so now they're exactly the same again. Sometimes the tool, the diff, you may want to change the diffing information, how it's displayed. Let me give you an example. Let's say we are quoting and we make a change, an improper change. Let's say, instead of saying if you can't program it, you haven't understood it, we say if you haven't programmed it, you haven't understood it. And let's just say this slips us by. And we scroll down and we see that no, this actually tells us that we've made these mistakes. So now we can fix them. But as you can see here, it's a little tricky to tell what exactly happened here. The programmed part is easy to tell. We added the MED to change it from program to programmed. But changing it from can't to haven't, this is a little less clear what happened here. This is because by default, the diff compares the original and the quote letter for letter. The way you could change this and say compared word for word so that it says can't and haven't is by changing the pattern that you're using here. So this tool gives you more advanced controls to determine what the diff down here looks like. Now, odds are you're not going to need to change this, and changing the pattern is a bit more complicated, so this is more for power users, but I just want to show you kind of what you can do with this if you really want to. So instead of the period, which stands for every single letter, you could instead say, give me everything that's not contained, that's not white space. So any letters or, apostrophes like this. And then the plus means like consecutive, like sequences of letters and apostrophes and stuff, like non-white space. Consecutive, like sequences of non-white space. And so now it says can't and haven't, and program and programmed. And so now it's easier to tell that the word can't was replaced with the word haven't. What we can do now is we can say, so if you're just comparing this for yourself, for your own personal use, then you're essentially done. I mean, you could indicate the change. Like now the change would be proper. There's no issues left because you used the brackets. And so you'd be done basically. You just copy your quote right here and you put it wherever you're using it. You paste it into your text. Or if say if you want to save this for later, or you want to make it public for some reason, let's say you found a misquote in some text and you want to make it public, then at the bottom, I've already prepared this here, but you would simply fill out the title for this quote check or this diff or whatever you want to call it. You'd provide your name if you want, that's optional. You can give any additional notes that you want, such as credits or context or instructions for how to read the diff, and then you can save it. Now you can share this link with anyone and they will be able to see it. Here's a real-life example where the Atlas Society, which is an objectivist institute, misquoted Cameron Winklevoss. And this is a separate window, but before I show you the diff, I want to encourage you to see if you can find the mistake on your own. The original text says, "The societies that have perpetrated the worst crimes against humanity have been censorship and propaganda states. Long live free speech." The quote says, "The societies that have perpetuated the worst crimes against humanity have been censorship and propaganda states. Long live free speech." Now maybe you just noticed it when I read it out loud. There's a small mistake here in terms of how many letters changed, but quite a big change of meaning nonetheless. So when we look at the diff, we can see that the Atlas Society changed it from perpetrated to perpetuated. This is the kind of thing, it's a thing that you could easily miss, but it's the kind of thing that Quote Checker will show you. It's so that you can avoid such a mistake. This kind of error doesn't happen if you copy-paste, so we can conclude that the Atlas Society transcribes manually, which is error-prone. You should always copy and paste the original text. Sometimes there are situations where you just can't do it, like you only have a printed version, although even then you should check if there's an ebook version, or maybe somebody scanned the text online or something, or has already done an accurate transcription. But sometimes you have to transcribe manually, then you just have to be very careful and conscientious. But yeah, if you copy-paste, normally there shouldn't be any problems, and then you use Quote Checker to make any changes properly. And by enabling people to expose misquotes, such as this one, Quote Checker promotes intellectual conscientiousness. I have another example here where the Atlas Society misquoted Bret Weinstein. Now let's say I'm not actually super happy with this diff. I mean, I think it's all right, but I think it could be better. But this is where forking comes in. Forking, you can see right here, there's a link to fork this diff. Forking allows you to build on other people's previous work. It brings you back to this form with the original and the quote and everything else that the previous person provided already filled in so that you can build on it. In this case, you can see that the diff is pretty, how should I say, granular. And in addition to changing the pattern, what we could also change is change the diffing algorithm. So there's currently 4 different diffing algorithms, and sometimes they produce the same result, but sometimes they produce different results. Sometimes they reduce the number of issues, sometimes they exacerbate the number of issues. The diffing algorithm essentially tells Quote Checker how to compare the quote and the original. If we change this, for example, from Myers to histogram, we can see that now there are 27 issues as opposed to 22. But I can see here that this is a little too granular for my taste. So for example, it treated this D as something it has in common because there's a word and there's a word created, and they both share D. I don't like this. So the first thing I'm going to do here is change it so that it only recognizes it, or it changes it to, as rather than comparing the text and the original and the quote letter by letter, it compares them word for word. Now it already does it better, I think. And now if we change it to histogram, we further reduce it from 15 issues to 11 issues. And so you can see how using the pattern and the diffing algorithms, choosing the right pattern and choosing the right diffing algorithm in conjunction, it just gives you a more powerful tool to really compare the original and the quote meaningfully. So anyway, that's Quote Checker. I hope you try it, and I hope you find it useful.